The air in the restaurant is thick with tension as Deputy Brooks points a steady finger toward the floor. "Hey, pick that up." "Pick it up," he says, his voice calm but firm. He is looking at a pile of trash that was just tossed down, but the woman standing over it doesn't move an inch. Janie stares back at him with a look of pure defiance, her arms crossed tightly over her black tank top. She isn't just a random customer, she carries the heavy weight of a grudge that has been simmering for a long time. "They say, but I used to work here," she snaps, using her past history as a shield against the officer's command. It is clear she feels she owns a piece of this place, and that rules for normal people don't apply to her. Deputy Brooks doesn't blink, repeating his request with the same level tone, "I don't care. Pick that up." The restaurant is quiet as other people watch the scene unfold, sensing that things are about to get much worse. Janie's face twists into a scowl as she digs her heels in. "I will not," she declares, her voice rising so everyone can hear. Then, she takes a sharp turn into a personal attack, trying to insult the man in uniform standing in front of her. "And you're privileged, you white or whatever you are," she says, spitting the words out like they are poison. In this moment, the small argument over a piece of litter transforms into a deep battle of wills. Janie has made her choice to stand her ground, and by doing so, she has set a trap for herself that she won't be able to escape. It was a normal evening in the town of Lady Lake when the call came in over the police radio. The sun was starting to go down, casting long shadows over the local businesses. The dispatcher's voice was calm as they described a disturbance at a nearby restaurant. Someone was acting out, making a scene, and refusing to be quiet. This wasn't a high-speed chase or a big robbery, but the deputies knew these kinds of calls could change in an instant. Deputies Brooks and Mendez pulled their patrol cars into the parking lot. Through the large glass windows of the diner, they could see people looking uncomfortable. Inside, the lights were bright, and the smell of fried food filled the air, but the mood was far from happy. They stepped out of their cars, the gravel crunching under their boots, and walked toward the entrance. They were there to handle an intoxicated person who was reportedly yelling and causing trouble for the staff and customers. As they pushed open the heavy door, the sound of a woman's loud voice hit them immediately. Most people in the restaurant were trying to look away, focusing on their plates to avoid the drama. The deputies moved through the room with a steady pace, their eyes scanning for the person in the middle of it all. They found her quickly, a woman who looked like she had a lot on her mind and a heart full of anger. They didn't know it yet, but this simple call was about to turn into a long and difficult night for everyone involved. Janie stood in the middle of the diner, her eyes red and her movements slightly unsteady. When Deputy Brooks approached her to ask what was happening, she didn't try to hide her anger. She explained right away that she was an ex-disgruntled employee who had come back to talk to the owner. To her, this wasn't just a restaurant anymore, it was a place where she felt she had been wronged, and she wanted answers. The deputies tried to keep things calm, but Janie was focused on finding the person in charge. She claimed she just wanted to speak with the owner, who she believed had just walked into the building. Even though she was no longer on the payroll, she acted like she still had every right to be there, pacing around and ignoring the fact that her presence was making everyone else nervous. She spoke about her past job as if it gave her a special pass to ignore the rules of the establishment. Deputy Brooks listened, but he could see that Janie wasn't in a state to have a productive talk. He told her that the owner wasn't available and that the staff wanted her to leave. Instead of listening, Janie began to argue, her voice getting louder as she insisted that she couldn't just leave. Her identity as a former worker was the only thing she cared about, and she was using it as an excuse to stay and continue her protest. The situation inside the diner was quickly reaching a point where words were no longer enough. Deputy Brooks stood tall, his hands resting near his belt, as he looked Janie in the eye. He spoke clearly so there would be no confusion, the people who ran the restaurant wanted her to leave. This was a formal warning. In the eyes of the law, she was now trespassing on private property. "You want me to leave?" Janie asked, her voice high and full of disbelief. It was as if the idea of being kicked out of her old workplace was something she couldn't even imagine. Deputy Brooks didn't waver, telling her firmly that she had to go. But Janie didn't turn toward the door. Instead, she planted her feet and asked where she was supposed to go, acting as if the world outside the restaurant didn't exist. The other customers watched as the deputies tried one last time to get her to walk away on her own. But Janie's pride was too big. She insisted that she couldn't just leave, turning a simple request into a major battle. By staying in that spot, she was moving past a simple argument and heading straight toward a serious legal problem. The warning had been given, the line had been drawn, and Janie was choosing to step right over it. The tension moved from the restaurant floor to the details of Janie's identity. Deputy Brooks knew he needed to know exactly who she was before things went any further. "Do you have ID on?" he asked. Janie nodded and said she was sure she did, but when she reached into her bag, she didn't pull out a driver's license. Instead, she held out a blue debit card as if it were the same thing. "Where's your ID card?" Brooks asked again, his frustration starting to show. Janie began to fumble and stall, acting like she couldn't find it or didn't understand why it was so important. She started giving the officers a hard time, calling out to other deputies by name and acting like she was better than the situation. She even started to use bad language, showing that she was losing her patience with the officers. The deputies stood their ground, refusing to let her play games. They asked for her name and her date of birth, but Janie kept talking in circles. She gave them her name, but then she added insults right after it, making it clear she wasn't going to make anything easy for them. The simple task of checking in ID had turned into a standoff of its own, proving that Janie was ready to fight the officers on every single step of the process. The air inside the small restaurant felt tighter with every minute that passed. Deputy Brooks knew that as long as they stayed inside, the situation would keep bothering the people trying to eat their dinner. He made a decision to move the conversation out to the parking lot, hoping the fresh air might help Janie calm down. "Hey, let's go outside," he said, guiding her toward the exit. Janie didn't fight the move, but she didn't stop talking either. As they stepped through the heavy doors and into the evening air, the sounds of the restaurant faded away, replaced by the hum of crickets and distant traffic. But the change in scenery didn't change Janie's mood. She stood on the sidewalk, looking back at the building with a mix of sadness and anger. She kept repeating that she used to work there, as if the walls of the restaurant owed her something. The deputies stood a few feet away, giving her space but keeping a close eye on her every move. Outside, the lights from the patrol cars cast a soft glow on the pavement, making the whole scene feel more serious. Janie continued to pace back and forth, her voice still loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. She was still refusing to cooperate and was becoming more upset that the deputies weren't taking her side. Moving outside was supposed to de-escalate the problem, but for Janie, it was just a bigger stage for her to continue her protest against a job she no longer had. The calm air of the parking lot did not last long. Deputy Brooks looked at Janie and gave her a serious warning. He told her that her behavior was starting to cross a line. "Okay, dig yourself a hole," he said, meaning that every bad choice she made was just making her situation worse. He wanted her to understand that she was moving away from a simple talk and toward a trip to jail. Janie did not seem to care about the warning. Instead of quietly leaving, she kept arguing about the trash on the ground. She even brought up her past again, saying she had been hogtied in the county jail before. It was clear she had been in trouble with the law in the past, but she hadn't learned how to stay out of it. She was choosing to be difficult instead of following the easy path home. The deputies watched as she continued to act out. They told her that they needed her information and that they weren't going to play games anymore. Every time Janie opened her mouth to argue or refuse a command, she was digging that hole a little deeper. The chance to walk away was disappearing, and a much darker night was waiting for her. Janie stood in the dim light of the parking lot, her voice shaking as she shared something personal. "My mom left me here on my birthday," she cried out, trying to make the deputies feel sorry for her. She used the date as a reason for why she was so upset and why she shouldn't have to follow the rules that night. In her mind, being abandoned on her special day gave her the right to act however she wanted. The deputies listened, but they could see that Janie was using her emotions to avoid the real problem. While she talked about her birthday and her family, she still wouldn't move away from the restaurant. She seemed to think that her personal sadness was more important than the law. Even when the officers tried to bring her back to reality, she kept leaning on her story to justify staying where she wasn't wanted. Instead of helping her, bringing up her birthday only showed how much Janie was struggling to face the truth. She was trapped in her own feelings, and she couldn't see that the deputies were just trying to do their jobs. Her birthday card was a last-ditch effort to get her way, but in the serious world of law enforcement, it wasn't enough to stop what was coming next. The argument in the parking lot took a strange and confusing turn. Janie began to talk about something that had happened when she used to work at the diner. She brought up a story about throwing her fake eyelashes into the tip jar. To the deputies, this seemed like a very odd thing to brag about, but to Janie, it was a way to show how disgruntled she had been. She seemed to think this act of rebellion made her special or proved a point about how she had been treated. Deputy Brooks tried to stay focused on the real problem, telling her that her past choices with the tip jar were not his concern. "That's not my problem," he said, trying to bring her back to the fact that she needed to leave. But Janie wouldn't let it go. She argued that it was someone's problem at one point, and she felt like the restaurant still owed her for the time she spent there. She acting like her bad behavior in the past was a reason for the officers to respect her now. As she went on about the busboys and the servers with kids, it became clear that Janie was living in the past. She used these strange stories to avoid the truth. She was standing in a parking lot, intoxicated, and refusing to follow a legal order. The story of the eyelashes in the tip jar didn't make her look like a hero, it only showed the deputies that she had a long history of making trouble for the people around her. As Janie realized that her stories about the owner and the tip jar were not working, her mood shifted from sad to mean. She stopped trying to get sympathy and started using her words to hurt the officers. Because she could not find a logical reason to stay, she began to attack the deputies for who they were. She looked at Deputy Brooks and Mendez and started hurling insults about their skin color and where she thought they came from. "You're privileged," she spat, her voice full of hate. She called them names and told them to go back to other states, even though Deputy Mendez calmly told her he was born and raised right there in Florida. Janie did not care about the truth anymore. She was using racial slurs and mean comments because she was angry that she was losing the argument. She thought that by being mean, she could make the officers back away or lose their cool. The deputies stayed professional, but the air was now filled with Janie's loud and ugly language. She was no longer just a woman who was sad about her birthday, she was now a person acting out with pure malice. By choosing to use these insults, Janie showed that she had no respect for the people trying to help her. Her logic had failed, and the racial pivot was her last way of trying to feel powerful before the situation turned physical. The verbal battle in the parking lot finally reached its limit. The deputies had given Janie every chance to walk away, but she had used that time to scream insults and refused to move. When Deputy Brooks realized that Janie was not going to follow any more orders, he moved in to take her into custody. This was the moment where the argument stopped being about words and started being about action. Janie saw the officers moving toward her and instead of giving up, she decided to fight back. Her face was full of rage as she lunged toward the deputies, trying to push them away or get into their personal space. By choosing to move toward the officers in an aggressive way, Janie crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. She was no longer just a trespasser, she was now actively resisting the police with force. The sound of scuffling feet and heavy breathing filled the air as the deputies worked to grab her arms. Janie screamed and pulled away, her body tense and wild. She acted as if she could win a physical fight against two trained officers, but her choice only made the situation more dangerous for everyone. This was the point of no return. The second Janie used her body to attack the officers, her fate for the night was sealed. The parking lot became a place of noise and movement as the deputies moved to stop Janie's fighting. Because she was pulling away and acting wild, they had to take her down to the ground to keep everyone safe. The gravel felt cold and rough as Janie landed on the pavement, but she did not stop struggling even then. She twisted her body and tried to hide her hands, making it very hard for the officers to put the metal handcuffs on her wrists. "Stop resisting," the officers shouted, their voices deep and serious over the sound of the struggle. Janie ignored them, screaming and trying to kick her legs at anyone who got close. It took the strength of both deputies to finally get her arms behind her back. The clicking sound of the handcuffs finally locking into place should have been the end of the fight, but for Janie, it was just the start of a new level of anger. Even with her hands locked behind her, Janie kept yelling and moving her body on the ground. She was out of breath and her hair was a mess, but her eyes were still full of defiance. The deputies stood over her, breathing hard themselves, as they prepared to move her to the patrol car. They had managed to get the cuffs on, but they knew that Janie was far from finished with her battle against the law. The situation took a disgusting turn as the deputies tried to search Janie before putting her in the car. Even though she was in handcuffs, her anger was still boiling over. As the officers checked her for weapons or hidden items, Janie lunged forward with her face. In a moment of pure disrespect, she gathered saliva and spit directly into the deputy's face. It was an act of assault that shocked even the experienced officers. "She just spit in my face," the deputy called out, clearly upset by the gross and dangerous act. Not stopping there, Janie began to use her feet as weapons, kicking at Deputy Mendez and another officer named Kelly. She was no longer just being difficult, she was actively trying to hurt the people who were doing their jobs. The search had to be stopped several times because Janie wouldn't stop thrashing and lashing out. By spitting and kicking, Janie added serious felony charges to her list. The officers had to be extra careful now, knowing that she would use any part of her body to attack them. What started as a woman refusing to leave a restaurant had turned into a violent scene where she showed zero regard for the safety or health of the deputies. Because Janie would not stop kicking her legs, the deputies had to use a special piece of equipment called a hobble. This is a strap used to tie a person's feet together so they cannot hurt anyone or kick the doors of the patrol car. Even as they wrapped the strap around her ankles, Janie continued to scream and call the officers names. She acted like she was the victim, yelling that she was tired and that the officers were little boys. The struggle to get her legs restrained was difficult because Janie kept twisting her body. She was so focused on fighting that she didn't seem to realize how much trouble she was truly in. The deputies worked quickly to make sure she was secure so they could finally put her in the back of the car. By the time the hobble was tight, Janie was completely immobilized from the waist down. The parking lot was finally starting to get a little quieter as Janie's ability to move was taken away. However, her mouth was still moving, and she continued to shout at the deputies as they lifted her into the seat. The hobble was the only way to make sure the ride to the jail would be safe for everyone involved. Inside the back of the patrol car, the reality of the night finally began to settle in, but Janie still wasn't ready to listen. As she sat there with her feet tied, she kept yelling that she had been through this before and that the jail was like a home to her. She acted as if she was too tough to care about being arrested, shouting that the deputies should do something original instead of taking her to jail. One of the deputies looked at her through the window and spoke the words that finally made her stop for a second. He explained that because she had chosen to kick and spit on them, she wasn't just looking at a simple ticket or a quick release. "You just ain't going to have no bonds," he told her firmly. This meant she would not be able to pay money to get out of jail right away, she was going to have to stay there and wait for a judge. Janie tried to act smart and talk back, but the deputy's message was clear. Her violent choices had turned a bad night into a long-term problem. She could scream and curse all she wanted, but the metal doors were closed, and the no-bond reality meant her time in the outside world was over for now. The ride to the county jail began in the dark, with Janie still fighting a battle she had already lost. As the patrol car arrived at the county jail, the final legal count of the night began to take shape. The deputies had documented every moment of Janie's behavior, from her first refusal to leave the restaurant to the violent struggle in the parking lot. By the time she reached the booking desk, she was no longer just a disgruntled employee, but a person facing serious felony crimes. The officers officially charged the 33-year-old with 2 counts of battery on a law enforcement officer for the kicking and striking that took place during the arrest. Because she had fought against the handcuffs and the search, she was also charged with resisting without violence. To round out the list, her clear state of being drunk and causing a scene added a charge of disorderly intoxication. Janie's loud protests and insults did nothing to change the paperwork being filled out by the deputies. The investigation was carefully documented in arrest reports, ensuring that the court would see exactly why the night had ended so badly. The chaos of the restaurant was now replaced by the cold, quiet process of the law, where Janie's actions were boiled down to a list of criminal charges that she would have to answer for in front of a judge. As the sun rose over Lady Lake the next morning, Janie sat in a holding cell, the adrenaline and alcohol finally fading. The reality of the previous night's events was much harder to ignore in the silence of the jail than it had been in the noisy parking lot of the diner. The insults she had shouted and the spit she had flung couldn't be taken back, they were now part of a permanent record. The restaurant back in town opened its doors as usual, the staff likely relieved that the disgruntled ex-employee was no longer pacing their floors. For the deputies, it was the end of a long shift and the start of a pile of paperwork, but for Janie, it was the beginning of a long legal road. She had walked into that diner looking for a confrontation, and she had found one that would change the next few years of her life. In the end, Janie's story serves as a stark reminder of how a single night of bad decisions, fueled by anger and intoxication, can spiral out of control. What could have been a simple exit from a building turned into a series of felony charges, all because she chose to dig that hole a little deeper with every step.